Cool. Oh, okay. See, I have a recorded little thing. Okay, so hi there, everybody. Yes, I'm Julie Saylor. I work for the Maryland department at the Central Library downtown. And I'll apologize in advance. I have a cat that's running around out here and she already tried to demand to go outside. Let's hope she doesn't walk across my screen and knock me off, but we'll just do the best we can. Okay, so I guess I should go ahead and start by trying to share the screen. This has turned into quite a thing. Someone says they believe in cats. Me too. Okay, let's see how this goes. Okay, people can see my screen. Does that sound about right?
Yep, we're looking at it.
Okay, you can hear me, right? Because we had trouble in our tech check, but now we're okay. Good. Okay. All right. So I'm going to try to get this started then. Okay. All right. Okay. Excellent. All right. And pardon me for a second there. Okay. Now I think I'm almost set up. Okay, and the cat is coming. So I apologize again. Well, we'll see if she settles. Let's hope she settles. Okay. All right, so you see here, the program is called Mediums, Magicians, and the Ouija Board, a Spiritualist History of Baltimore. It's a long title, and I'll explain in a minute why the title is the way it is. Before I begin, I'd like to say something, though. I know I have some magicians. In fact, I think about 3 or 4, and possibly some spiritualists in the audience. Also, maybe some people who believe in ghosts. I do want to recognize that spiritualism is a religion for some people, and I really don't intend to disrespect anyone's belief. And then heads up, this program does last a little bit more than an hour, and I hope you're going to stick around until the end because I'd like to answer your questions. So if something occurs to you during the program, go ahead and put that in the chat box. I think also you may have an opportunity at the end to unmute yourself if you prefer. And if I have the energy left at the very end, there might be a little bonus material that I've never done in public before. And so we'll see how that goes. I already have a volunteer for it. Bronwyn. Okay, so in my work in the Maryland department, every so often I come across a photograph that intrigues me. Here are some photographs from the early part of the 20th century of the Demons Club of Baltimore. At least one of the people in these photos, Thomas C. Worthington III, was known to me as a person who contributed a lot of photographs to our photograph collection. But who were the demons? I wanted to find out. Well, briefly, the Demons Club was a club of amateur magicians formed in Baltimore in December 1911. I discovered that Baltimore has a rich magical history that only magicians seem to know about. I began investigating some of these magicians and discovered that many magicians of this era made it their business to expose charlatans who claimed to perform actual magic rather than stage illusions. One Maryland magician, Henry Ridgeley Evans, made it his mission to expose fakes. He wrote a book called The Spirit World Unmasked. So this idea of exposing charlatans is a frequent theme I've encountered in researching the history of magic, and I had a lot of questions. Who were these people, and why did magicians want to debunk them? This is where my research fell down a rabbit hole, and it brought me to some fascinating, unexpected places, and may indirectly explain why Baltimore was such a fertile ground for magician societies and even the invention of the Ouija board. So the charlatans the magicians wished to attack were the spiritualists. Spiritualism was a religious movement that had its roots in the mid-19th century. As I began my research, it became clear that this was the lens I needed to use to make sense of the topics I cover in this program. That's why I call it a spiritualist history of Baltimore. So I'll be discussing spirit mediums, magicians, and the Ouija board, and I'll be covering these from the 1840s to around the time of the Depression, from the perspective or lens of spiritualism. And I'll be covering these things in more or less a chronological way, but this program is actually thematic. Remember, a lens is an optical instrument. A lens can make things clearer, but at times you may see something, but it may not actually be what you think you are seeing. So you can expect a few surprises. So I'll start with some background about spiritualism. The modern spiritualist movement began on March 31st, 1848 at a house in Hydesville, New York. 12-year-old Kate and 14-year-old Margaret Fox heard rappings or knocking, which they believed to be a ghost. The family abandoned the house and sent the sisters to Rochester to live with their older sister, Leah, but the rappings continued. The sisters believed the rappings were messages from the dead. The first people to show interest in the Fox sisters were two Quakers, Amy and Isaac Post. They believed the rappings were proof of the afterlife of the soul. In 1849, with the support of the Posts and journalist Eliab Capron, the sisters presented to an audience of 400 at Corinthian Hall, the largest theater in Rochester. In 1850, they appeared at Barnum's Hotel in New York City 3 times a week. Literati such as James Fenimore Cooper, Horace Greeley, and William Cullen Bryant attended. While Maggie and Katie toured the country, Leah stayed in New York and held spirit circles. In the media of the time, these were called the Rochester Rappings. Soon, other people tried forming spirit circles, also known as seances, and discovered they also could communicate directly with the dead. These people became known as spirit mediums. Some would speak while in trance, others would do writing or drawings while under control of a spirit. And a trance, by the way, is an altered state of consciousness similar to hypnosis. So the remarkable thing is that these early mediums were almost all women, most of them extremely young women. This was during a time when women almost never spoke in public, not even the early feminists. In the 1850s, approximately 200 women traveled the country as trance speakers. Why did this phenomenon take off so quickly? Victorians began questioning the authority of religion on the ultimate destination of a soul, whether a person who died would go to heaven or hell. The bereaved might want to communicate with their loved one and find reassurance that their soul has found peace in another realm. Spirit mediums filled that very real desire. From its beginnings, spiritualism became associated with radical thinking of the Victorian era. Many of the trance speakers came from upstate New York, a place of early feminist and abolitionist activity. These mediums were not trained by or ordained by anyone in any religion. Instead, they communicated with the dead in a direct, unmediated way. These young women were challenging the predominant patriarchal and hierarchical nature of religion. Though not every spiritualist espoused these beliefs, the early spiritualist movement became allied with the feminist movement, the abolitionist movement, vegetarianism, and the free love movement. The people packing the auditoriums to see these mediums might not have agreed with all of this thinking, but the fact these mediums were associated with these radical philosophies was not a secret to the people of Baltimore. And I'll show you that later on. Victorians also considered spiritualism to be compatible with advances in science and technology. This was a movement that did not depend on faith or belief in a foundational text. Spiritualists focused on what could be directly observed, on manifestations of spirits mediated into the realm of the living. If that sounds like believing in something invisible, realize that advances in Victorian science already prepared people to believe in things they could not see. Even the non-religious could believe in electricity and the telegraph, the telephone, and radio. From the 1850s, Baltimore became a stop for well-known spiritualist trance speakers. As far as I can tell from my research, Baltimore did not produce a medium that toured. The most successful of the early mediums tended to be young females. Their performances were considered to be more authentic because of their perceived youth and purity. Their physical beauty was undoubtedly also a draw, as they were speaking in front of mixed male and female audiences. So I'll show you a few of these women who visited Baltimore. The first medium I'll discuss is Cora Hatch, who came to Baltimore in December 1856. She was born in Cuba, New York in 1840. At her birth, she was born with a caul over her head. In other words, she was born with the amniotic sac intact over her body, which is supposed to predict the child will have psychic abilities. Her family moved to a utopian community called Hopedale, also in New York. Members of this community promoted beliefs in temperance, nonviolence, and abolitionism. The parents left Hopedale to start a community of their own, and this is when Cora began to show promise as a trance medium. She began appearing publicly at the age of 15. She married 4 times, first marrying at age 16. Again, many spiritualists, especially early in the movement, had radical ideas about women's rights. Some would reject traditional ideas of marriage. This form of feminism was called the free love movement. Readers of the Baltimore Sun may have seen this article about Hatch's first divorce. And let me read a passage of this to you. The writer of this has been shown a list of about 40 trance-speaking mediums of both sexes who have either separated from their husbands and wives or who are living in extreme unhappiness. One who has figured in the recent free love conventions is set down as having abandoned 2 husbands, both of whom are still living, and one woman traded husbands with a sister spiritualist. Well, evidently, this person found Cora Hatch's behavior to be most scandalous. Another famous medium that visited Baltimore was Oxa W Sprague. She visited Baltimore in 1858 and 1859, and she was born in Vermont. At the age of 25, she was afflicted by a debilitating joint disease. The spirits cured her and began speaking through her, and she began touring as a medium. At her performances, she would speak under mesmeric influence and lecture on spiritualist principles, reassuring audiences that death was only a transition and not to be feared. She also painted while blindfolded, recited poetry, and sang, all while in trance communication with the spirits. She died of a recurrence of the disease at age 34. In this short time, she had earned enough money to support herself from her appearances and extensive writings. Her correspondence and papers are preserved at the Vermont Historical Society. This is an image of her tombstone, which bears the inscription, "I still live." Not everyone was convinced by the spirit mediums. In April 1853, Professor Anderson wrote the Baltimore Sun a series of 3 letters, hoping to, quote, save his fellow creatures from the fangs of a league of impostors, unquote. He took particular aim at the Fox sisters, calling them the witches of the 19th century, and suggested that the wrappings were produced with the help of electricity, ventriloquism, or the cracking of toe joints. According to Anderson, the mediums traveled in gangs of 8 or 10 to different cities, investigating and recording recent deaths and upcoming marriages for prominent families, because such information would prove useful in spiritualist lectures. Anderson closed his 3rd letter vowing, "But there is one thing I will promise you, sirs. I will not desert my cause, but will fight to the death every rapper in the Union." These letters were eventually published as a booklet. Remember Professor Anderson, we may be seeing him later. So these were some of the mediums that visited Baltimore during the early part of the spiritualist movement. Gradually, spiritualism lost some of its associations with the women's and the abolitionist movements. The Civil War, however, actually increased public interest in spiritualism as people wanted to contact their loved ones they had lost in the war. These early trance speakers acted as missionaries for the movement. Now some wish to establish spiritualist churches and spiritualist conferences. Audiences wanted to see more elaborate and convincing manifestations of the spirits. And also there was more skepticism. I'll talk about a few important figures in this later period, but first I'd like to give you an idea of the popularity of this movement. In 1870, spiritualist author and medium Emma Hardy Britton estimated there were around 11 million spiritualists in the United States. By 1890, around 45,000 Americans identified themselves as belonging to a spiritualist congregation, though not all spiritualists would actually join a church. Also, a scholar who used newspaper ads to analyze spiritualist activity in U.S. cities identified Baltimore as the 2nd most active city for spiritualist meetings for the time period 1867 to 73. The most famous medium that came to Baltimore during this period was Nettie Coburn, who came to Baltimore on December 12, 1862. Like many mediums, she was born in upstate New York. At the age of 21, she began touring. Not long after this appearance in Baltimore, Coburn was drawn to Washington, D.C. She was performing in a seance where she met First Lady Mary Todd Lincoln. Mary Todd Lincoln suffered greatly after the death of her son, Willie, who died in February of 1862. She invited Nettie to the White House in late December. Several other mediums also visited the White House, and Mary Todd attended spiritualist meetings, sometimes bringing Abraham Lincoln with her. Mrs. Lincoln continued to consult mediums after the death of her husband. This is a photograph of Mary Todd Lincoln by a spirit photographer. The ghostly figure in the picture is supposed to be Abraham Lincoln. In 1891, Nettie published a book with the intriguing title, Was Abraham Lincoln a Spiritualist? Lizzie Doughton visited Baltimore in 1863. She was a trance speaker who rejected marriage and advocated for equal pay for equal work, and she would do so during her lectures as she toured. Though she was not from Baltimore, she had an interesting Baltimore connection. At the end of her appearance in Baltimore on January 11th, 1863, she fell into a trance and was visited by the spirit of Edgar Allan Poe. Poe dictated the poem, The Streets of Baltimore, to her. For years, many people believed the poem was actually written by Poe. Poe actually was a pretty busy ghost. He dictated poems to other mediums also. Back in October of last year, I shared more of Poe's spirit poems in another program called Haunted Maryland that the library gave. In this later period, there were a few prominent male mediums. The most famous of these were the Davenport brothers. Born in Buffalo, New York, they toured England during the Civil War and later toured extensively in the United States. They were known for an elaborate manifestation known as the Spirit Cabinet, where the mediums would be tightly bound in a wooden cabinet with musical instruments placed in a compartment between them. Inside the darkened cabinet, spirits would play the musical instruments. The Davenports came to Baltimore in March 1864. I found an account of this visit in a spiritualist newspaper called The Banner of Light. The author of this article, Washington Danskin, was initially skeptical, but came away believing in the manifestations. Washington Danskin was an important figure in Baltimore spiritualism. Danskin was a merchant from Baltimore. He was born Catholic, but converted to spiritualism around 1853 or 1854. He started a church called the First Spiritualist Congregation, which was incorporated in 1865 and met at Saratoga Hall. Danskin's church was quite active. They had weekly meetings, a Sunday lyceum for children, and outdoor camp meetings that attracted as many as 2,000 people. His church existed until about 1909. A fellow spiritualist rightly called Danskin the father of Baltimore spiritualism. I recently came across correspondence between Danskin and spirit medium Oxa W Sprague from 1857 when he invited Sprague to come to Baltimore. Danskin also invited mediums Cora Hatch, Nettie Colburn, the Davenport brothers, and other mediums to speak in Baltimore long before he founded his congregation. Danskin was a frequent contributor to the Banner of Light. He also started his own spiritualist newspaper in Baltimore called the Spiritual Telephone. I've never been able to locate a copy of that. And he also wrote a book, which we'll talk about later. Danskin himself became a medium, as did his wife, Sarah. Sarah practiced as a healing medium, guided by the spirit of Revolutionary War era physician, Dr. Benjamin Rush. As a medium, Washington Danskin was visited by the spirit of Edgar Allan Poe. Poe dictated a poem to him called The Christian's Pit for the Damned, where Poe told him that hell did not exist. The grandson of Washington Danskin Jr. died in May 1861. This obituary described the passing as a spiritual birth and said that the son passed from earth to the home of freedom. Spiritualists looked at death as a transition to a place they called Summerland. Spiritualist mourners would sometimes wear white to funerals to honor the transition of their loved one. Gravestone inscriptions sometimes reflected spiritualist language. When Washington Danskin died in 1881, the Baltimore American reported, the solemn black was not worn, and the crepe upon the door was of a light color. Incidentally, I found other 19th century spiritualist churches and the names of other spiritualist ministers in Baltimore in my research. Baltimore also is home to the Progressive Spiritualist Society, the Religio Philosophical Society, and the Maryland State Association of Spiritualists. And it's possible I'll find more. I've not stopped doing research. I've been researching this for maybe about 2 years. So the Davenport brothers set the tone for this later period of spiritualism. Mediums of the later 19th century favored physical rather than trance mediumship. These physical manifestations included the ringing of bells, the sounds of musical instruments, and ghost-like materializations. There were also spirit writings, drawings, and photography. This caused some to question the authenticity of these manifestations. In some cities, spiritualists were treated as outright frauds. In 1885, 2 Baltimore City policemen arrested 3 fortune tellers, one of whom claimed to be a medium. Just 3 years later, Margaret Fox appeared at the New York Academy of Music to reveal the rappings of the Fox sisters were fake. However, she quickly retracted the confession, saying she had been paid to give it. Baltimore spiritualists continued to defend their religion. In 1895, 2 lecturers posted a placard declaring fraud, fraud, fraud on Rains Hall, the site of frequent spiritualist meetings. On the evening of May 28th, the lecturers demonstrated a cabinet manifestation. A crowd of angry spiritualists disrupted the exhibition, some of them threatening to have one of the men arrested. So I hope I made it clear that Baltimore was, for some people, a town that welcomed mediums and spiritualists. This might explain why Baltimore had a hand in producing the best known spirit talking board, the Ouija board. So why was it necessary to invent a talking board? Recall that mediums didn't go to divinity school to discover they had a knack of contacting spirits. They found out by just trying it. Spiritualist newspapers sometimes published instructions on how to form and run a circle or seance. The spirits use different means of communication. Some spirits simply used the voice of the entranced medium. Some spirits directed the hand of the medium in writing or drawing. Some spirits used rapping or knocking as the way to talk to the living. Rapping posed the biggest challenge for interpretation. Unless a medium just wanted answers to yes or no questions, there could be some real logistical obstacles to overcome. So let's go back to Washington A. Danskin. He wrote a book called How and Why I Became a Spiritualist, first published in 1858. This book was a spiritualist bestseller. He published 4 editions of this book. In it, he talked about his own experiences in spirit circles, and this is a quote from that book. Through the magnetism emanating from the medium, vibrations or tipping of the table were produced, and while one of us would repeat the alphabet slowly, the communicating spirit would move the table at the appropriate letters, which, being recorded, would be found to form words and sentences. Well, obviously, this method could be very time-consuming. One tool that was used to interpret spirit raps was the dial. Francis H. Smith, a member of Danskin's circle, described the dial. Imagine the face of a clock with its minute hand, but instead of the figures, you have the letters of the alphabet. Around its axis is drawn a cord. The tipping of the table draws the cord and causes the hand to revolve, pointing at the letters. This device was used in Baltimore, but was not known to other spiritualists until Smith described it in the Banner of Light in 1858. Another early tool used to facilitate spirit communication was called the planchette. This was invented in France in the 1850s and was first sold in the US in the 1860s. You probably recognize this as part of the Ouija board, but this worked a little differently. The small hole at the tip of the heart held a pencil to make it easier for the spirits to direct the medium's hand when writing. The talking board started off as a homemade invention. In 1886, someone in Northern Ohio invented an alphabet board that could be used with a planchette. An article appeared in the New York Daily Tribune with instructions on how to make one, and this article was shared in newspapers across the country. Manufacturers looked to cash in on the talking board craze. The W.S. Reed Toy Company in Massachusetts was the first to make a talking board to sell in 1886. There were other companies who made spirit boards, but now we'll be talking about the Ouija board because of its connection to Baltimore. I'll give you the version of this story that makes the most sense to me, but realize there is some controversy here. Charles Canard owned a fertilizer business in Chestertown, Maryland, and had an interest in the paranormal. His office was adjacent to the business of undertaker and furniture maker E.C. Reich. He asked Reich to manufacture a spirit board for him. After neighbors showed interest in the board, Canard decided to move to Baltimore to look for investors. When Canard relocated to Baltimore, Reich was no longer involved in the enterprise. In 1890, Canard met attorney Elijah Bond. Bond was interested in Canard's talking board because his sister-in-law, Helen Peters, was a spirit medium. Peters and Canard lived in the same boarding house, the Langham Hotel at 529 North Charles Street. At a seance on April 25th, 1890, Peters named Canard's talking board the Ouija. According to one story, the board told her what its name should have been. According to another story, she found the name Ouija on a locket she was wearing during the seance. So this is one of the few places associated with Baltimore spiritualism that's still in existence. It's now a 7-Eleven. And this is a plaque you can see when you go in the store. Bond made improvements to the design and patented it in 1891. According to Bond, he then incorporated a company called the Canard Novelty Company and gave $500 in financing. He had the trademark for his board issued to this company. Canard left the company 14 months after it started. One of the partners, Washington Bowie, continued running the business and renamed it the Ouija Novelty Company. In 1897, Bowie leased the rights to manufacture the board to William Fuld and his brother Isaac. William Fuld had joined a company at a young age, working his way up to a foreman and stockholder. By 1901, a feud had erupted between the brothers, and this is where things get a bit complicated. They established separate businesses, still selling talking boards. Isaac's board was the same as William's Ouija board, but he renamed it the Oriole. William sued Isaac. The case was not settled until 1919, when William was given the right to continue to use the name Ouija for his board. This lawsuit got much media coverage, and everyone involved sent letters to the Sun pleading their own case. Canard wrote saying he was the inventor. Reich had already died, so Reich's son wrote the editor of the Sun papers saying his father was the true inventor. The spirits gave their own opinion in 1939 when a spiritualist using the board asked for the real identity of the inventor. The spirits told him it was William Fuld. But as we've seen, the idea of a talking board had already been widely publicized before Reich, Bond, or the Fuld brothers had anything to do with the Ouija. Although some use the board as a toy or party diversion, some people still use the Ouija board as a spiritualist tool. The board even produced a best-selling author. In 1913, a St. Louis housewife named Pearl Curran tried using the board. She was contacted by a spirit named Patience Worth, a woman who purportedly lived in New England in the 1600s. Patience began dictating poems and novels to Mrs. Curran, and many found critical acclaim. Parapsychologists investigated the authenticity of her work, but did not entirely succeed in discrediting her. Worth's books and poems, however, helped the Ouija become a bestseller across the nation. Some critics attacked the use of the Ouija board, claiming it encouraged the use of black magic and threatened Christianity. Many used the Ouija as a source for advice. After all, it was called the mystifying oracle. During the early part of the 20th century, it was not unusual to read that women sought divorces based on the advice of their talking boards. And couples also used the board as an opportunity to get close on a night out. Fuld himself did not believe in the power of the Ouija, but he did make a lot of money selling the board. In 1920, he built a new factory at 1508 Harford Avenue. And this building still exists. It's now a city landmark being used as senior housing. William Fuld died on February 24th, 1927, after a fall from the roof of the building. He was overseeing the replacement of a flagpole. Fuld was buried in Greenmount Cemetery. Elijah Bond was also buried at Greenmount Cemetery, and thanks to Robert Murch of the Talking Board Historical Society, he has a unique memorial marker. By the way, much of the information and images I presented in this part of the program are from his websites, the Talking Board Historical Society and williamfuld.com. So now we're going to be talking about the history of stage magic in Baltimore, but remember, we are still looking at this history through a spiritualist lens. Magic in Baltimore has a long history. The first record of a magician's performance in Baltimore is in 1787, when Signor Falcone came to town to perform at the Old Theater. The first modern stage magician was Jean-Eugène Robert Houdin from France. You probably recognize this name in another form. Houdini named himself after Robert Houdin. Robert Houdin began performing in 1845, right around the time the Fox sisters began demonstrations of their spirit wrappings. He dressed the way many magicians dress today, in a black tailcoat with a top hat. As far as I know, he never traveled to Baltimore, but his Scottish rival did. Remember Professor Anderson and his criticism of the Fox sisters? In his final letter of April 7th, 1853, he closed, "I trust that the public will not think that I seek notoriety or gain by this expose. I trust in God that I may be the humble instrument in saving many from lunacy or death." Well, things were not as they seem with Professor Anderson. In doing background research for this program, I discovered his real identity. He was John Henry Anderson, a magician also known as the Wizard of the North. Anderson was hardly an altruist in denouncing the Fox sisters. He was looking for publicity for his Grand Soirée Magique at the Holiday Street Theater. He promised awe-inspiring feats of necromancy meant to expose the fallacy of witchcraft, demonology, psychology, and the more modern ism, spiritualism. Magicians made Baltimore a stop on their theatrical tours during the age of vaudeville from around the 1880s through the Depression. We'll be discussing the three most prominent magicians of this era: Harry Keller, Howard Thurston, and Harry Houdini. None were from Baltimore, but all three made multiple appearances here and had connections with amateur magicians in Baltimore. Harry Keller, born as Heinrich Keller, was born in Erie, Pennsylvania in 1849. At the age of 10, he went to work in a pharmacy. One day, he blew a hole in the floor of the building because he was playing with chemicals. So he ran away from home. He was taken in by a minister in upstate New York, where he saw a magic show by the Fakir of Ava. He became the magician's assistant. In 1869, he left to become an assistant to the Davenport brothers. As you recall, the Davenports were spirit mediums whose trademark were manifestations from a spirit cabinet. After 4 years, Keller left to perform magic with another Davenport assistant, William Fay. After an unfortunate shipwreck in 1875, Fay went back to the Davenports and Keller continued performing on his own. Once Keller left the Davenports, he worked as a stage magician, not as a medium. Fay and Keller would stage seances as part of their act, and eventually Keller became known for his tricks involving the spirit cabinet. In at least one case, Keller went back to the spiritualists to earn his bread. In 1879, he visited Philadelphia and DC to perform magic, but did not sell many tickets. So he advertised a spiritualist lecture, which proved to be more lucrative. Even Keller's posters give one the impression, without explicitly saying so, that dark forces might be assisting him in his magical acts. In the 1880s and 1890s, spiritualism was coming under increased scrutiny. Philadelphia philanthropist Henry Siebert was a believer. When Siebert died in 1883, he endowed a chair in philosophy at the University of Pennsylvania with the condition that a commission be appointed to investigate the truth of spiritualism. The university appointed a commission including scientists and invited mediums to demonstrate their craft. One thing the commission investigated was spirit writing, which was done on little portable slates. That's what you're seeing right there. Harry Keller appeared before the commission to demonstrate how the sleight of hand of a magician could be used to produce the same results. Spiritualists objected that members of the commission were biased against them. The commission produced its report in 1887 saying, "We beg to express our regret that thus far we have not been cheered by the discovery of a single novel fact." Keller made several appearances in Baltimore. This program is from Ford's Theater in 1899. There's an effect here, the Cassadaga propaganda, that used the smaller version of the spirit cabinet. During the latter part of the 19th century, magicians aspired to great magician status. Audiences seemed to accept only one magician at a time as great. The previous great magician was Alexander Hermann, a French magician known as Hermann the Great. When he died in 1896, Keller took this role. By 1905, Keller was looking to retire and to designate a successor. Fellow magicians speculated this would be Paul Valadon, a German magician who had worked with Keller. After Keller's Baltimore performance in 1907, Baltimore magic historian and amateur magician Henry Ridgeley Evans wrote in a British magic publication, "If you ask me, I say Howard Thurston. By all means, I predict that upon Thurston, Keller's mantle will fall." As Keller's friend, Evans may have had some inside information. Baltimore can proudly boast its part in magic history. On May 16, 1908, at a performance at Ford's Theater in Baltimore, Harry Keller passed his wand and mantle to Howard Thurston. Baltimore magician Thomas Worthington wrote, "In his adieu to the spectators, Professor Keller rested his arm affectionately on the shoulders of the younger man. Tears dimmed Keller's eyes as he walked off the stage." Keller did not lose the opportunity to persuade Baltimoreans that spiritualism was a fraud. In this last performance, he demonstrated how mediums cause tables to rap, produce spirit writing on slates, and other manifestations. So who was this new great magician, Howard Thurston? Like Keller, Thurston came from humble beginnings. He was born in 1869 in Columbus, Ohio. Shortly after seeing the show of Hermann the Great, Howard ran away from home. He began riding the rails as a hobo, worked as a newsboy on trains, and eventually earned enough money to buy magical equipment and a book, Hoffman's Modern Magic. In New York City, he joined a gang of pickpockets and was caught by the police. William Round, secretary of the New York Prison Association, sentenced him to 3 weeks in jail. And actually, this was his first big break. Round converted him to Christianity and helped him enroll in a Christian school. Thurston left without graduating, but was recruited by Round to work at a reform school in upstate New York. However, Thurston saw Hermann the Great again. He bought a train ticket to the next city where Hermann was performing and trailed him on the train to secretly observe him. From there, Thurston began working as a magician. He performed mostly at carnivals and dime museums and also traveled the East Coast. Thurston told The Sun that he traveled twice to Baltimore to perform in carnivals during this time. Oops. In 1899, Thurston arrived in New York City and began performing in vaudeville. He then traveled to London to perform at the Palace Theatre. Thurston resolved to make his show into a great, elaborate spectacle like Hermann's. He returned to the States, then left for Australia, China, and India. Though he arrived in Australia penniless, he left India with $50,000 he had earned from performing. And so here's the backstory of the passing of the mantle. Valadon did not have the money to pay Keller all at once, so Thurston became Keller's choice. They met over dinner in May 1907 when Thurston signed a contract to acquire Keller's magical equipment for $7,000. So as we've seen, Baltimore is a place friendly to spiritualists in the 19th century. From the late 19th and early decades of the 20th century, Baltimore was also friendly to magicians. Magic clubs were popping up in many US cities, and several national and even international organizations of magicians were founded during this time. The second magic club founded in the US was called the Society of the Sphinx, founded by Maryland magic historian Henry Ridgeley Evans in 1902. This club vanished after a few months after the Society of American Magicians was founded in New York City. So the Demons Club of Baltimore was not established until 1911, but Evans's founding of the Society of the Sphinx indicated that amateur magicians were already active in Baltimore, and clearly Evans had connections with a larger community of magicians. So let's talk for a moment about Henry Ridgeley Evans. Evans was born in Baltimore in 1861. He was a prolific writer, writing at least 14 books on magic. Most of these were on the history of conjuring or stage magic. Evans also had an interest in spiritualism and the occult. In 1898, he gave a talk about a collection of occult and magical literature before a library association in Washington, D.C. I forgot to mention, by the way, Evans, his day job was as a librarian for the Department of Education. So this would have been a natural thing for him to do. Evans wrote Hours with the Ghosts, in which he exposed spiritualist manifestations. Here's Evans's recreation of a spirit photograph. This table of contents from Hours with a Ghost shows how extensive this discussion was. He discussed in detail Keller's testimony before the Siebert Commission. But interestingly, Evans also said that some manifestations may have been effective because of the audience's suggestibility and the medium's telepathic abilities rather than the medium's use of conjuring. His books may have had a bigger influence than you might initially believe. Hours with a Ghost was reissued as the Spirit World Unmasked and was offered in the Sears catalog right alongside books on astrology and hypnotism. And by the way, if you've seen the Netflix series Archive 81, you've seen an image of this book at the beginning of episode 4, Spirit Receivers. It's the book with the orange cover. So as I mentioned, Magicians sometimes revealed how mediums produced their manifestations, but these revelations could have been problematic for magicians because some spiritualists were using the same tricks as the conjurers themselves. Magic clubs and associations encouraged magicians not to reveal the secrets behind their effects. When Henry Ridgeley Evans founded the Society of the Sphinx in 1902, he asked members to pledge not to expose even the simplest trick or illusion on the public stage. Of course, these clubs also served a social function. Magician Arthur D. Gans founded an association called the Society of Baltimore Magicians on February 22nd, 1911. Charles Ziegler, who was vice president at the time, renamed it the Demons Club of Baltimore Magicians on December 7th of the same year. I'm not sure about the reason for the name change, but the new name definitely captured the flavor of the magic of the era. Arthur Gans, founder of the Demons, worked as a reporter for the Baltimore American and once operated 3 movie theaters in Baltimore. In 1920, he began working for the B&O Railroad as an exhibitor of safety pictures. Some called Gans the safety first magician because of this. Like some of the other demons, he corresponded with other magicians, some of them famous. His collection of magic ephemera is preserved at the Maryland Center for History and Culture. Gans was known for his renowned billiard ball routine and another trick called the Kaiser Decapitated. He also was a mentalist, which means he was a mind reader. And we're going to see the billiard ball routine a little later. Another founding member of the Demons was Thomas Chu Worthington III. He was born in 1879. Worthington graduated from the Maryland Institute and became a salesman for the John T. Willis Company, a distributor of X-ray and photographic equipment. Worthington was introduced to magic by his grandfather. At the age of 7, he saw Hermann the Great perform in Baltimore. He was a magician who witnessed the passing of the mantle at Ford's in 1908. He met Howard Thurston the following season. So what sort of magic did he perform? According to his obituary, he had escaped within seconds from any locked trunk. He also sometimes performed in costume as a hobo or as Santa Claus. He developed relationships with famous magicians and was able to acquire items from Alexander Hermann, Harry Keller, Howard Thurston, and others. He even owned Keller's spirit cabinet and Robert Houdin's wand. Worthington wanted to build a temple of magic in Baltimore to house his collection, but it did not come to pass. Upon his death in 1953, the collection, valued at $100,000, was donated to the Ringley Museum in Sarasota, Florida. This collection eventually passed into the hands of private collectors, including the Egyptian Hall Museum, a private magic museum in California. Worthington also had other interests. He collected natural history specimens, which he donated to Loyola University, and he also collected photographs. And this is how I first became acquainted with Mr. Worthington, as I was indexing items for our photograph collection. He donated several photographs to the Pratt Library. This is one of them. It's a photograph taken after the Great Fire of 1904. So you might think Worthington had a large house to accommodate these collections. At the time of his death, he was living at 2113 Poplar Grove Street in West Baltimore. And this is a pretty humble little row house. Worthington, however, was not an entirely humble guy. He did not like the idea of any magic organization that permitted non-magicians to join. Worthington began referring to non-magicians in the Demons Club as the peeping toms of magic. In 1923, Worthington, along with demons Louis E. Schilling and Charles Ziegler, founded the Society of Osiris, a magicians-only club, and he published a newsletter called the Osirian. Another founding member of the Demons Club was Charles Fulton Orsler. He was born in Baltimore in 1893. At the age of 13, he began working as a reporter for the Baltimore American newspaper. I found his autograph on our image of the Demons Club from 1915 when Orsler was a young man in his 20s. And here's a close-up so you can see his picture. He's sitting to our left of Thomas Worthington. Thomas Worthington is easy to identify because he has his beard and mustache, sort of, he looks like a wizard. The man sitting to the right of Worthington is Howard Thurston. So by 1920, Orsler had moved to New York City. He remained an amateur magician, but became better known as an editor, as a playwright, and as an author of detective novels. He was the only member of the demons that I could find who published books exposing the methods of spiritualists. And we will be seeing Orsler later. So let's go back to the Demons Club. What made them so remarkable? They were the second oldest magic club in the world. Their slate of officers all had demonic titles. Harry Keller and Howard Thurston were honorary members, but as we've already seen, some of the demons had close personal relationships with Keller and Thurston. The Demons Club was the only magic club with its own clubhouse. This was in West Baltimore at Belvedere and Groveland Avenues. I don't think this building exists anymore, but I did discover its location on a Sanborn fire insurance map from 1928. The building had its own stage made from the wood from the stage at Ford's Theater, where Keller passed the mantle to Thurston. The clubhouse was open to the public a few times a year. Several famous magicians performed on the Demon stage, including Harry Blackstone Sr., Howard Thurston, Harry Houdini, Dante, and Henry Ridgeley Evans, the magic historian. There are several photographs and newspaper accounts of the Demons Club annual dinners with Howard Thurston. These dinners sounded like great fun for everyone involved. The first dinner given Thurston's honor was in March 1914. The Sun reported that rabbits leaped from the pockets of unsuspecting waiters, ducks came quacking from the folds of their jackets, and real eggs rolled from their cars. This was the start of a tradition that lasted for many years. And our photograph is from the second Demons Club dinner in 1915. Here's an invitation from the Demons Club dinner in 1918. As you see, this is a clubhouse and the door opens up. This invitation was designed and made by Thomas Worthington. Long past his retirement, Harry Keller continued his friendship with the Demons Club. Here's a Christmas card from Keller from 1919. In 1923, Arthur Gans used his connections with the B&O Railroad for a most unusual celebration. A new dining car, the Martha Washington, was sidetracked at Mount Rail Station and was used for the banquet. When Thurston arrived, he was presented with a ticket for Keltherma, a name which combined Keller, Thurston, and magic. This is an image of Gans performing his famous billiard ball routine on the car. And here's a picture of the demons outside the car, waiting in line, wearing their horned caps. So the early decades of the 20th century brought a world war and global pandemic, and people became even more interested in communicating with the dead. At the same time, Keller, Thurston, and Houdini grew in prominence. Baltimore's theaters continued to host a few spirit mediums. Medium Anna Eva Fay came to Baltimore's Auditorium Theater in 1916. Actually, she had appeared in Baltimore as early as 1887. She was a medium and mentalist who used magic tricks to convince her audience of her psychic powers. In fact, she applied for membership to a British magicians club, the Magic Circle, and was accepted for membership in 1913 as the first honorary lady associate. Like female mediums before her, Fay used her prominence to promote women's rights. This is an article from 1915 when she came to Baltimore to perform at the Hippodrome Theater. The archenemy of the Spiritualists also came to visit in 1916, Harry Houdini. Of course, nearly everyone has heard of Harry Houdini, but you may not know much about his life. His birth name was Erich or Erich Weitz, and he was born March 24th, 1874 in Hungary. The Weitz family emigrated to Wisconsin and moved to New York City in 1886, where his father started a Jewish religious school. Erich and his brothers also worked to support the family. While working at a necktie factory, Erich met a friend who was interested in magic. Erich read the memoirs of Robert Houdin and renamed himself Harry Houdini in Robert Houdin's honor. At the age of 17, they left the factory to work as magicians. This friend quit after a few months, and Houdini's brother Theo became his partner. At this time, they were called the Brothers Houdini. Eventually, Theo and Harry would perform separately, and Theo became known as Hardin. Houdini began performing at dime museums in Manhattan, where he met and married his wife, Bess. They performed a trick called metamorphosis, where Harry would escape from a locked trunk. Once he escaped, Bess would be found inside. In 1897, he joined a Midwest traveling medicine show called the California Concert Company. The proprietor would sell snake oil during the day, and the troupe would perform at night at the local opera house. Houdini was asked to add a Sunday seance to the show. Houdini used some of the same escape skills he used in his magic shows to create manifestations for the seance, but he learned some tricks of the medium trade. Before his seances, he would visit cemeteries to gather names, read old newspaper files, and gather gossip about prominent families. Houdini and Bess continued performing in seances for a time after they left the medicine show. His career really took off in 1899 when he began performing on the vaudeville circuit. In vaudeville, he was asked to perform only his escape tricks. In 1900, he traveled to London, then toured Europe, the US, and Australia during the first decade of the 20th century. During this time, he perfected many kinds of escapes and accepted challenges wherever he performed. He also developed two versions of a water escape. One of them was an escape from a milk can full of water, and the other an escape from a water torture cell while hanging upside down. In the early days of his career, he did these escapes behind closed curtains. His brother Hardeen was challenged to a straitjacket escape in Wales in 1904. He decided to do it in full sight, which he believed added to the dramatic effect. Houdini also began performing many of his escapes in full sight. In 1913, Houdini's mother died, and this was a death he took hard. In 1914, he started a new all-magic show, the Grand Magical Review, but audiences still preferred his escape routines. In 1915, he returned to the United States on tour. To attract an audience for his shows, he began performing the Straitjacket Escape suspended in midair out in the open. This drew huge crowds. Houdini performed a stunt in Baltimore on April 26, 1916. He chose to do this in front of the Sun Building at the corner of Charles and Baltimore streets. Of course, doing this trick in front of a newspaper building ensured press coverage. Years later, Baltimore magician Milbourne Christopher described this feat. Houdini squirmed and twisted like a barracuda at the end of a giant fish line. His face became redder by the moment as blood rushed to his head. Every 5 seconds, the man with the stopwatch shouted the time, 50 seconds, 55 seconds, 1 minute. By a minute and a half, one of Houdini's arms had freed its buckle. His other arm was wrenched clear at the 1 minute and 55 second mark. 30 seconds later, the canvas and leather restraint plummeted down. As a mighty roar of acclaim greeted his success, Houdini, the master showman, smiled and extended his arms, taking his bow upside down in the air. This was in front of a crowd of 50,000 people, probably the largest number of people ever assembled on a downtown street in Baltimore. So now we're going to go a little more chronologically. This performance took place before Houdini really became concerned with spiritualism. At this point in his career, he was mostly performing on the vaudeville circuit. Magician routines in vaudeville tended to be somewhat short and were part of an overall slate of performers. Before the mid-20s, the magician who was doing a full evening of magic in the tradition of Keller was Howard Thurston. Of course, Thurston visited Baltimore multiple times. To give you a flavor of his show, here's a program from Ford's Theater when he came in 1922. In this performance, he used magical means to answer the question, do spirits return? Thurston never made any representation that the spirits were helping him, but his marvels had a spiritualistic flair. He made spirit paintings on a blank canvas, caused a phantom piano to play, and endowed an automaton vampire with life. The levitation of the Princess Karnak was his most famous effect. This was a trick he acquired from Harry Keller when Keller passed the mantle to him. Levitation was a trick done by many past magicians using various methods, but during this era, levitation definitely had spiritualist associations. In seances, tables would mysteriously rise. One famous 19th century British medium, it was reported, would levitate himself across the seance room and out the window. The Sun declared the levitation of the Princess Karnak the most beautiful and inexplicable of Thurston's features. Thurston said, his object is to mystify and entertain, and that he wouldn't deceive you for the world. Eventually, however, Houdini would accuse him of being a spiritualist, perhaps because Thurston actually allowed for the possibility of communicating with spirits while exposing fraud where he saw it. Thurston would never match Houdini's zeal in attacking spirit mediums. Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of the Sherlock Holmes mysteries, was a believer and toured the United States to lecture on spiritualism in 1923. While in England, Houdini befriended Doyle and began visiting seances with him. Arthur Conan Doyle's wife became a medium herself. Houdini attended one of Lady Doyle's seances where Houdini's mother was contacted, but Houdini remained skeptical. Scientists wanted to investigate the validity of the messages from beyond. In December 1922, the Scientific American magazine announced a $5,000 reward for conclusive psychic manifestations. Oh, okay, that was the cat. Mediums would be investigated under controlled conditions observed by scientists and by Houdini himself. These were mediums who could materialize flowers and live birds, play instruments, and exude a mysterious substance called ectoplasm from every orifice of their body. A medium from Boston, Mina Crandon, showed great promise. As part of the Scientific American tests, Crandon submitted to invasive searches and agreed to be restrained by a box constructed by Houdini. However, no medium was deemed worthy of the prize. In 1924, Houdini published his book, A Magician Among the Spirits, which ended his friendship with Doyle. Houdini continued his crusade. He began lecturing against spiritualism across the United States. The next season, 1925, Houdini developed his first full evening magic show in the tradition of Hermann and Keller. Some sources claim Houdini started his 1925 season in Baltimore, but actually Houdini started his season at the Maryland Theater in Cumberland in Western Maryland. Houdini's show consisted of 3 acts: magic, feats of escape, and exposures of spiritualism. In November 1925, Houdini came back to Baltimore. The Baltimore News ran stories about this appearance all week long with some very aggressive headlines. Houdini on trail of Baltimore seers, Houdini to expose Baltimore frauds, and Houdini on warpath against seers. A few months later, Houdini appeared before the United States House of Representatives, testifying for the ban of fortune-telling in Washington, D.C. Despite the national publicity, the bill did not pass. As you might imagine, Houdini was not making friends with the spiritualists. Houdini went even further with his attacks. During the 1925 tour, he brought with him a group of mostly female undercover investigators to visit local mediums. He had a few magicians who also assisted him in exposing fraudulent mediums. One of them, Samry Furkel, had published books debunking spiritualism. Samry Furkel was not the person he seemed to be. This book was actually written by former Demons Club member Fulton Orsler. In October 1926, Orsler received a letter from S. Malcolm Bird of the Psychical Research Society. Bird quoted spirit medium Alice Wood, who reported, "The waters are black for Houdini, and Houdini's days as a magician are over." This was one of many threatening messages received by spirit mediums regarding Houdini. In mid-October, Houdini performed at the Princess Theater in Montreal. A student from McGill University visited him backstage, asking if it was true he could withstand any blow to his abdomen. The student punched Houdini before he could tense his muscles. Houdini continued to Detroit for his next run, where he collapsed after his first performance. He died of a ruptured appendix on October 31st, 1926. Some conspiracy theorists claim that spiritualists had something to do with his death. Whether this is true is debatable, but Houdini feared the spiritualists enough that he began carrying a gun, and he had actually advised Orsler to do the same. Houdini reportedly had a compact with his wife and friends that he would try to communicate from the other side after his death. No authenticated communication has ever been received from Houdini. The last official Houdini seance was held 10 years after his passing. Bess sadly declared, "My last hope is gone. I do not believe that Houdini can come back to me or to anyone." Houdini's death marked the beginning of the end of an era in magic. Vaudeville was waning, partly because of the popularity of motion pictures. The Great Depression struck a serious blow to live entertainment. Still, Howard Thurston continued to perform, making appearances in Baltimore. On May 16, 1933, he was honored at a special dinner hosted by the Society of Osiris Magicians at the Lord Baltimore Hotel to recognize the 25th anniversary of the passing of the mantle. Among the guests were the mayor of Baltimore, Thomas Worthington, and Henry Ridgeley Evans. Thurston was presented a wand made from wood from Ford's Theater, which, when held to the light, cast perfect silhouettes of Keller and Thurston. This wand became a sacred artifact passed from magician to this day. Thurston made his last appearance in Baltimore in October 1934 when he suffered a minor heart attack at the Century Theater. Thomas Worthington visited him backstage. Thurston said, "Tom, you're the only one in this world who really cares for me and the only one who will care a damn when I am gone." Thurston died of a stroke on April 13th, 1936, at the age of 66. Worthington and Thurston had corresponded extensively over many years, and Worthington preserved all of Thurston's letters. Worthington published a little book of his memories of his friendship with Thurston. He also honored his friend by commissioning a bronze emblem inscribed to Thurston from the Society of Osiris, which is still on Thurston's grave in Ohio. I was very fortunate to meet magician and collector Rory Feldman, who collects Thurston memorabilia. He is a person with that correspondence and many items related to the Demons Club and Society of Osiris. And many of the images you are seeing are part of Rory's collection. Perhaps because of Houdini, spiritualism began to lose its grip on the public imagination, though some spiritualist churches remain active to this day. Magic in Baltimore, however, continued to flourish. In 1938, the Demons Club became the Keller-Thurston Assembly No. 6 of the Society of American Magicians. The group started by Worthington, the Society of Osiris, is not active, but still has 4 living members. The Society of Osiris also sponsored 2 magic clubs for young magicians, the Disciples of Osiris and the Pyramid Club for the youngest members. These clubs nurtured a future generation of young magicians, including Phil Thomas, who went on to start the Yogi Magic Mart in Baltimore, and Milbourne Christopher, who arguably became Baltimore's most famous magician. Christopher also was a magic historian and author of many books, some of which I used to do research for this program. And Baltimore still has a magic scene to this day, which I hope you'll feel inspired to explore and support. This is a great site to check out if you want to know more. So let's go back to my earlier question. Why did magicians want to discredit spiritualists? Houdini justified his crusade by pointing out that some people spent large sums of money to speak to the dead. A few people committed suicide in hopes of joining their loved ones in Summerland. Some have speculated that mediums and magicians were competing for the same audiences, but as I've shown, some magicians actually worked as mediums at times. So I asked a different question: why were magicians of that era interested in spiritualism? I found a hint at an answer in a book called The Secret History of Magic by Peter Lamont and Jim Steinmeier. They asserted, the world is a more magical place than we generally think. There is a hidden world inhabited by what we cannot see and do not suspect. There is a secret world beyond the questions that we ask. I believe magicians and spiritualists were trying to tap into that realm. In the years after the Depression, magicians no longer emphasize spiritualism in their acts, but now there are magicians who practice a genre of magic called bizarre magic, which focuses on storytelling and sometimes uses imagery of the supernatural, horror, and the occult. Some bizarre magicians even conduct seances. So there's a famous quote by magician Robert Houdin, and it goes like this: a conjurer is not a juggler, he is an actor playing the part of a magician. Magicians use sleight of hand and misdirection to make the impossible possible, to bend our perceptions. Aside from duping the grieving, why might mediums have used these same skills? One medium, Annie Benninghofen, admitted to Houdini, I really believed in spiritualism all the time I was practicing it, but I thought I was justified in helping the spirits out. They couldn't float a trumpet around the room. I did it for them. They couldn't speak, so I spoke for them. I thought I was justified in trickery because through trickery, I could get more converts to what I thought was a good and beautiful religion. So I'll leave you with this thought: were mediums, magicians, and those who use talking boards tapping into the same thing, a very human desire to feel awe and wonder and to confront death, the great unknown. Before I end, I want to say thank you to all those who so generously helped me. And I want to give a special shout out to magician and collector Rory Feldman and to the Society of American Magicians, Keller Thurston Assembly No. 6. And finally, I want to give you a slide with my contact information. And I have a resource list to share if you email me, or if you don't think of a question tonight, you're always welcome to email me with those questions. So there's my email. And with that, I am finished. Let's see here.
All right, Julie,
There we
thank you
go.
so much. We're all coming back together. So if we have any questions for Julie, please put them in the chat box if you'd like, or raise your hand and I will call on you to talk with Julie right off.
Thank you. That was an awesome presentation. I really enjoyed that.
I felt like we just traveled back in time. I love it. Time travel is real.
Okay. All right, got my other thing up. Okay. Are any questions?
Lots of kudos, no questions yet. Lots of kudos, no questions.
No questions. Oh,
I have a
wow.
question.
Okay, go. Who is this? Let me see.
April.
Oh, April, go ahead.
I was wondering, did you come across any connection to the magic lanterns with any of these magicians? Did they use them in the performances?
I assume that they did. I don't know a lot of information about magic lanterns. I got to tell you, I have limited experience with how some of these effects were actually done. I'm sort of a beginner in that respect.
Mhm.
I mean, the point of the program to me was, try to show the connections to Baltimore. I mean, more recently, I've gotten interested in actually trying to figure out how to do magic. I don't know. I don't know if I know anyone that does a magic lantern anymore. Maybe, oh, okay. David Parr is putting up his thumb. So he says, oh, yes, he has. There's a few magicians in this audience, by the way.
David, do you want to comment to April?
Yes, magicians included any technology that was developed that there's a famous Arthur C. Clarke quote that goes like this: any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So when technological advances were made and were not well understood by the public, magicians would add that technology to their programs because they looked like magic, right? So things involving electrical devices, magnetism, all sorts of things like that, including optical illusions, right? So yes, magic lantern shows, or what were sometimes called phantasmagoria, were sometimes part of magicians' programs.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say this also, like just sort of in general, David's comment about how they would, and is still true, I would assume, that magicians would try to adopt any technology that they could in order to create illusions. So if you look at some of the people that I discussed in the Demons Club, I don't think it's any accident that these people had experience with motion pictures and photography and x-rays and so forth.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. I mean, sometimes, magicians would at the very beginning of cinema, they would include cinema on their program, and it was because it was a wonder to behold, and people didn't necessarily understand how it worked.
Right. I think there was an early filmmaker, I hope I get the name right, Georges Méliès.
Georges Méliès, yeah, French.
Yeah.
He actually bought Robert Houdin's theater in Paris after Robert Houdin retired. And Méliès was a pioneer of special effects, and he was also a magician.
Yeah. So yeah. Someone wrote down "Trip to the Moon." Yeah, that's the movie he's known for.
Yeah, and some of his movies are straight up him performing a magic effect, a stage illusion for the camera.
Right.
So yeah, there's all that science and technology, magic, all intertwined.
Right. Well, that's a good answer. Thank you, David. I knew you'd help me out there. I don't know if there's any other questions.
Any other questions? for Julie for this evening.
Okay.
Julie, everybody, you filled everybody with so much information and knowledge. I don't know if they know what to do with it. So, do you want to? How are you feeling?
Well, okay, two things. One is, I don't know if there's any Archaeology Club members out there, but I have a certain obsession, and it's in locating the location of the Demons Clubhouse. I think I have found them, I think I found where they are located on a Sanborn fire insurance map, but for one thing, I know that they may have purchased the building, and I've been on the look for the land record, the original land record. And so far, I've not succeeded in finding that. And also, I kind of really would love to see where the building might actually have been. I do know that the parcel that it was sitting on is no longer, the parcel's not the same in that area of the city anymore. So some things have happened. So if there's any person that might find, might think it's a good time to help me, have a good time helping me out, figuring that out, I would love to hear from you. So, please email me if you want to help me out with that. And how much energy do I have left? I don't know how well this will go, but I kind of had some bonus material that I wanted to do. But the first thing I need to do is raise up my camera a little bit here. And I have a volunteer, which is Bronwyn. Can you see the table a little bit here?
Yes, we can.
You can see the table. Okay. And I kind of have a script, but I'm not going to use it word for word because that's just not going to work. Okay. David looks interested. So I have here two artifacts. You can see these are keys.
Yes.
Okay. And of course, keys are usually made of iron, and these are not simply any keys. These are actually have a history related to Baltimore. So I'm going to share their stories with you. And actually, I'll be doing a little test at the end with these keys. So one of these keys came from an ironworks on Saratoga Street, a company named G. Krug and Son. Don't know if anyone here has heard of this ironworks. They were founded in 1810, and they are the oldest continuously operating ironworks in the United States. Beautiful wrought iron and cast iron made by Krug can be found all over the city, such as at Greenmount Cemetery, the Baltimore Zoo, and Hopkins Hospital. Probably a lot of other places, because Baltimore is really known for its ironworks, or its elaborate iron architecture, I guess is the way to put that. He also was known for manufacturing locks and keys, and some of those can even be seen in Baltimore row houses and in houses in Colonial Williamsburg, which is kind of cool. The other key I got through sort of a happy accident. I was dining at a restaurant in Little Italy in Baltimore with a friend, and the owner of the restaurant recognized me as a librarian and wanted to give me something to keep if I could research the history of his building. So he handed me a large iron key, and he said he found that in the basement when he moved into the building. So I found out about the building. I did a little research. The building was at 248 Albemarle Street, and it once had been 2 row houses. It's easy to see that, like on Google Street View. One of them had been the home of an artisan named Benjamin S. Benson. Benson was also, it turns out, an iron worker who first apprenticed with Ross Winans of the B&O Railroad. He actually helped to build a first locomotive for the B&O Railroad, which was called the Tom Thumb. Maybe some of you have heard of that. There's like a replica of that locomotive in the B&O Railroad Museum. In 1851, he established his own ironworks at President Street near his home on Albemarle Street. And that same year, he was commissioned by architect James Bogardus to produce the iron facade for the Sun Iron Building. And this building was famously elaborate. Let me see if I can share my screen again just for a second. Can I share it again? I just want to show you a quick picture of this because it's very cool. That's what it looks like. You can see that, and this building, and I'm going to stop sharing in a second here if I can. I don't know. Can I stop sharing? How do I stop sharing?
You hit stop share.
Oh, golly. Oh, so I ruined my whole thing. Because I can't figure out how to stop share.
Oh, hold on, let me see if I can stop your share.
Yeah. Just wanted to show you that real quick. I don't know. Let me. Oh, here it
Okay,
is.
I stopped.
Okay, yeah, it was at the bottom of my screen. Great. Okay, excellent. So the thing about this building is it didn't just burn down, it melted in the fire in 1904, the Great Fire 1904. But I also found things out about Benson that are not known to architectural historians. So far, I've only told you things that you might be able to find out in just regular sources. Benson was also a healing medium. I found an account of his mediumship in a book by Washington Danskin, we already know about him, who founded the first spiritualist congregation of Baltimore. In 1857, Danskin's wife, Sarah, was gravely ill and conventional medicine did not help her. So Danskin called Benson to help. Benson was not a physician, of course. He was an iron worker. But as a medium, he had the ability to communicate with the dead. He was able to act as a medium for a doctor who had already crossed to the other side. So he healed Mrs. Danskin through the laying on of hands by using magnetic influences from the spirit world. So not only did he cure Mrs. Danskin, she also became a healing medium herself. We already heard about that. So the second key then came from the home of an artisan and healing medium. So I also discovered that this key had a magnetic influence of its own. So this is the part where Bronwyn has to help me out. Which key is which? Which key belonged to whom? Do you have any idea? I have a big, well, they're both pretty big keys. So one key is really large. And the other key on the top is a bit smaller. So which one belonged to Benson, do you think?
I'm going to go with the smaller one.
The smaller one might have been Benson's. Okay, that's interesting. We're going to test the key first, that the key you did not pick. So I'm going to see if anything happens to this key. What I'm doing is if this were really you in real life, I would let you touch the keys and look at them. So far, nothing is happening. I don't know what to say. By the way, this is a really heavy key. I'm not going to lie to you. These are heavy keys. Okay, so let's look at the second key. Let me see. See if anything happens.
It's turning.
Yeah, so I think that's the Benson key. This is the one that was from G. Krug. So that's
all right. Right.
That's my bonus material. So thank you.
Thank you. I think the mantle has been put your camera up a little bit, Julie. We can't see your face. We can only see half of it.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah. Sorry.
Oh,
but I don't have a second camera, so I can't show my face and keys at the same time. So anyway, well, thank you for being my audience.
I think the mantle has now been passed to you, and you should be getting the special wand, which would be really awesome. I don't know if that's it. I would love to see that special wand that was created. But thank you so much, Julie, for sharing your knowledge and your research and your enthusiasm with us this evening. We are all better for it. Everybody, thank you for coming and learning with us. I hope to see you at other events. Remember, we have the Penis Museum of Iceland tomorrow, so you don't want to miss that. And then I hope to all see you in person as well. So
yes, I'll have to come visit the museum for sure. Thank you so much. I really want to come see the museum now. Yeah.
Okay. And everybody stay well, stay curious, and email April about joining the Archaeology Club. And we're going to take that challenge, Julie, and find the Demon Clubhouse for you.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
All right. Good night.